Donald Trump promises a complete oil embargo and more to the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. On July 14th, Donald Trump will make an announced urgent statement regarding Russia. And today, sources from the White House have already stated that Trump is considering a so-called global oil embargo against Russia, as well as even tougher sanctions against the Kremlin to destroy Putin's military economy. And in this context, it has become known when the United States Senate will finally pass the bill on hellish sanctions against Putin, which is being promoted by Donald Trump's close friend, Republican Lindsey Graham. But that's not all. I'm Aleksey Pechiy. Today is July 12th. Let's closely examine the topic of the United States introducing tough sanctions against Russia. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So the publication, citing its sources, writes that growing dissatisfaction with the Kremlin may finally give the United States Congress an opportunity to adopt new sanctions against Russia. And Trump is seriously ready to support even a complete oil embargo. And here the publication reminds that the calls of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the United States to punish Russia economically have not had much effect since President Trump returned to the White House. Here, I'll quote Zelensky as a reminder. Sanctions need to be imposed faster, and the pressure on Russia must be strong enough for it to really feel the consequences of its terror. But as is written this time, Zelensky's request may have fallen on fertile ground. This week, Trump showed growing disappointment in Russian President Putin because of Russia's unwillingness to come to the negotiating table and his persistent desire to continue massive drone and missile attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine. And by the way, when Donald Trump was asked the other day, "Do you even know that Putin is not just continuing but actually increasing missile and drone attacks on peaceful Ukrainian cities? And what are you going to do about it?" Trump said, "Yes, I am well aware of what is happening. But wait until Monday, July 14th, and then I'll tell you how we're going to respond to all of this. Like, you'll see everything on Monday." The United States President, who was previously so fascinated by his Russian counterpart Putin, by the way, has so far refused to impose new economic restrictions against Moscow. Well, the White House apparently still believes that the Kremlin sincerely wants peace, despite the fact that it constantly finds reasons not to agree to a ceasefire, not to mention any meaningful negotiations. On Tuesday, Trump's dissatisfaction became public. "If you want to know the truth, Putin is dumping a load of crap on us." Trump said this at a televised meeting with top cabinet officials. His quote, "He's always very polite, but as it turned out, all of that is meaningless." And Trump's irritation toward Putin suggests that support for the bipartisan, which is very important, bill being prepared in the United States Congress to tighten sanctions may in fact be growing. This bill will, for the first time, include additional measures against countries that trade with Russians. Last month, Trump called this bill proposed by Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal very tough. But this Tuesday, he said that now he's looking at it very, very closely. That was a quote. More importantly, on the same day, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the co-authors of this bill, said that Trump, quote, "told me it's time to act, so we're going to act." And now, the bill is expected to be brought before the United States Senate for consideration by the end of this month at the latest. Of course, there are some nuances here. How could there not be? As they say in the Senate, the text of the bill still needs some work. In its current form, the document does not give the United States President enough flexibility to apply sanctions without considering Congress's position. Trump insists that he should always have the final word. And right now, the White House is working with the authors of this bill to give Donald Trump more freedom in applying this law after it is approved by the American Parliament. And now, a representative of Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the two authors of the bill, said that the document will probably not be considered, unfortunately, before July 21st. Because right now, Congress has some more important priorities. However, already in August, one of the chambers of Congress goes on recess, so the time to pass the law will be extremely limited. And you need to understand that if they don't make it before August, they'll only return on September 9th. Meanwhile, the allies of the United States of America are eagerly awaiting Monday because Trump promised to make some big, very important statement about Russia on that day. However, they still have doubts about whether Donald Trump has given up trying to establish any good relations with Russia. And how ready is he really to put Lindsey Graham's bill into practice? Let me remind you, back in March, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and his Democratic colleague Richard Blumenthal prepared a bipartisan bill on new tough sanctions against Russia. These sanctions could potentially completely deprive Russia of income from energy exports. That includes oil, gas, uranium, and so on. The bill provides for the introduction of 500% tariffs on imports to the United States from countries that purchase Russian energy resources. In other words, the logic of the bill is that buyers of Russian oil and gas will ultimately prefer to switch to alternative suppliers, which will cost them much less. Much cheaper than the complete loss of the American sales market. But there's a problem, because these secondary sanctions will affect countries like China, India, and Turkey, which buy oil from Russia partly through the so-called shadow fleet of secret tankers. The sticking point is whether Trump will be able to handle the economic consequences of a 500% tariff. Amidst the ongoing economic turmoil, the senators said they are ready to give Donald Trump the authority to lift the tariff. That is, to put it on hold for up to 180 days, provided there is congressional oversight. However, the White House insists that Congress should not have the authority to intervene if President Trump decides to lift or suspend these sanctions. That is, Trump is demanding that the bill be passed in such a way that only he and he alone can make decisions about imposing, lifting, or suspending these sanctions now and in the future. In fact, the introduction of such tariffs would be equivalent to a global embargo on Russian oil. So, if this bill comes into force, it will mean that no one in the world can buy Russian oil, gas, and so on if they want to trade with Americans. On the other hand, analysts are already saying that on July 14th, Trump may make one last warning shot. So Trump may come out to the Americans and say, listen, we need to acknowledge the risk that Russia poses to Europe and the entire world. And we'll have to accept oil prices closer to $100 or maybe even higher if we implement this bill. But supposedly we have to take this risk for the sake of strangling the Russian economy. However, this expansion of the United States sanctions regime and some form of secondary tariff threats may actually turn out to be effective. And here the European Union and the United States can finally act in sync. Moreover, this might work even at the stage of just threatening to apply them. Let me explain. The European Union at the G7 level is ready to introduce new sanctions against Russia. And this package of measures, among other things, includes lowering the price cap on Russian oil from $60 to $45 per barrel. This restriction allows the countries of the European Union and the G7 to provide maritime transportation and related services for the export of Russian oil to third countries, only if it is sold at the established price or below it. This means that Russia will start selling oil at a loss because $45 per barrel is already well below the market price. Add to that the costs of transportation, extraction, and so on, and it's simply a loss. And Trump may finally agree to such a step, adding that if even this measure doesn't stop Putin, then the United States will be forced to impose those very 500% tariffs. In addition, of course, some radical changes are needed in the control system that allows denying access to British and European financial and insurance markets. If some foreign ports do not comply with ship inspection standards, this is already a fight against the shadow fleet. This could increase confidence that ports are not allowing Russian oil that does not comply with the new rules. Simply put, if any country violates the rules, buys shadow Russian oil, and God forbid, even at a price above the established cap, it automatically loses access to European services. But at this point, the Americans can, as they say, raise their sanctions sword not over the Russians, but over those very countries that continue to buy Russian energy resources. And all of this can create an atmosphere of intimidation where, in fact, even without the introduction of strict tariffs, some countries may decide to act preemptively. Well, still, to move further away from the Russians. But still, we are all waiting for Trump's address on July 14th, and we'll see how much his latest statement matches his actions. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like.